30 years I drove a desk at that freight company. 30 years I knew every driver's name, every route, every excuse for a late delivery. And the week I was supposed to retire with a party and a handshake, my own son-in-law slid a folder across his desk and told me it was just a formality. He had no idea that folder needed my signature. Not his. Mine. But we'll get there. Let me tell you how a quiet man from the Texas Panhandle ended up owning the company that tried to throw him out the back door. My name's Roy Callahan. I'm 61 years old, and for most of my life I was the kind of man nobody wrote songs about. I ran the dispatch floor at Panhandle Freight Company, out of Amarillo, Texas, for 22 years. Before that I drove a rig myself for 11. I know the smell of diesel, the way some men know the smell of their own kitchen. My hands still remember the weight of a logbook. I started driving in 1980, 19 years old, hauling grain sorghum and cattle feed on the same 2-lane roads my daddy drove before me. Flatland, big sky, radio static half the night on the AM dial somewhere past Pampa. I met Carol at a truck stop diner outside of Childress. She was the only waitress who didn't roll her eyes when a driver ordered his third cup of coffee at 2 in the morning. I told her I'd marry her before I ever asked her name. Took me 4 months to work up the nerve to actually ask. Carol used to say I loved that highway more than I loved my own bed, and she wasn't wrong. Not for those first years. But when my knees started going in my late 30s, and the long hauls got to be too much on my back, Earl Whitfield, the man who owned Panhandle Freight, offered me a seat inside. Dispatch. I remember him telling me, "Roy, you already know every mile of road we run. Might as well get paid to sit down for once." I laughed at that for years. I want to say something before I go any further, because if you've watched enough of these stories, you know how they go, and I want you sticking around for this one all the way to the end, because the ending is the best part. If you're the kind of person who believes quiet people can still win, hit subscribe now, because there's more where this came from, and I mean to keep telling them. I married my wife Carol in 1988. We had one daughter, Denise, born in 91, and she is the best thing I ever built, better than any deal I ever made. Carol passed of ovarian cancer 11 years ago, right around the time Denise was finishing up her business degree at West Texas A&M. After that, it was just me and Denise for a good while. Father-daughter, a 2-man crew. Panhandle Freight wasn't a big company back then. Earl Whitfield started it in 1974 with 4 trucks and a CB radio, hauling cattle feed and oil field equipment across the Panhandle. By the time I came on as a dispatcher in 2002, we had close to 60 trucks and contracts running from Lubbock to Oklahoma City. Earl was a good man. Hard, fair, the kind of boss who remembered your kid's name and asked about her grades. I loved that job. I loved it the way some men love a piece of land. In 2009, when the recession hit, Earl came to me, not the bank, not his own brother, who was a silent partner at the time he came to me. He caught me in the parking lot one evening, after everybody else had gone home, still wearing his boots from walking the yard. Said the banks were choking him on the line of credit, and he needed $40,000 in 90 days, or he'd have to sell trucks just to make payroll, maybe lay off 6 drivers with families, depending on that paycheck. I remember standing there next to my truck, keys in my hand, and Earl saying, "Roy, I know it's a strange thing to ask a man who works for me, but I trust you more than I trust half the men on that board. I told him I'd have to talk to Carol. She didn't hesitate not 1 second. "Roy," she said, sitting across from me at our kitchen table with the checkbook between us, "we've never spent $1 we didn't need to. This is the first thing worth spending it on." We wrote the check the next morning. I had that money because Carol and I had been careful our whole marriage. We didn't take vacations, we didn't buy new cars, we put it away. I gave it to him, not as a loan, as an investment. Earl set it up quiet. Through a little holding company, he had his lawyer draw up Panhandle Holdings, LLC, so it wouldn't look strange on the books that a dispatcher owned a piece of the company he worked for. 11% back then. Just paper in a drawer, tucked inside a fireproof lockbox in our closet that Carol used to joke held nothing but our marriage license and my old draft card. Over the years, I kept buying in, a little at a time, whenever Earl needed cash and whenever I had it to spare. Nobody at that company, not one soul, knew Roy Callahan owned any of it. Not my coworkers, not my daughter, not even Carol. Before she passed, she knew about the money, but she never asked what it turned into, and I never told her, because by the time it mattered, she was already sick. And some things you just don't bring up at a hospital bed. Denise met Marcus Vance in 2016 at a Chamber of Commerce mixer downtown. He was 28, sharp suit, sharper smile, sold commercial insurance for a firm out of Lubbock. He was charming. I'll give him that the man could work a room like nobody I ever met. He asked me for my blessing before he proposed. Sat right across from me at the kitchen table, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Mr. Callahan, I want to build a life your daughter deserves." I believed him. I want you to remember that I believed him, because it matters later. They married in the spring of 2018. Beautiful wedding, out at a ranch venue off Highway 60. I walked her down the aisle myself. Cried like a fool. Best day I'd had since Carol died. Now here's where it turns, and here's where I need you to lean in, because the story I'm about to tell you is about how quiet a betrayal can be. It doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just a man deciding, slowly, that you're in his way. By 2020, Earl Whitfield was 74 and tired. His own son had no interest in trucking, moved to Austin, did something with software. Earl needed someone sharp to bring into leadership, someone who could talk to bankers and shippers in the same breath. Marcus, sitting at our Thanksgiving table, heard Earl was looking, and inside of 2 months he'd talked his way into a sales director position at Panhandle Freight. I want to be fair to him, he was good at it. Landed 3 new contracts his first year, including a big one with a distribution center up in Amarillo's Industrial Park. Earl liked him. Started grooming him. By 2022, Marcus was vice president of operations. My direct supervisor. That's when things started to shift. Small at first. He'd walk the dispatch floor and call me Roy in front of the newer guys. Never Mr. Callahan. Never any of the respect I'd have gotten from anybody else with 20 years on the floor. Little things. He rearranged my schedule without asking, moved my desk from the window to a spot near the break room, said it was for workflow, though every driver who'd been there a while knew that window seat had been mine since before Marcus could drive a stick shift. The real turn came at Denise's 32nd birthday dinner, spring of last year. Whole family there, my brother Dale down from Lubbock, Marcus's parents, a dozen of Denise's friends. Marcus stood up to give a toast, and somewhere in the middle of it, half joking, half not, he said, "And I gotta say, keeping Roy on staff all these years, that's real loyalty, considering what dispatchers pull in these days." The table laughed. Denise laughed. I laughed too, because what else do you do at your own daughter's birthday, sitting at a table full of people who love you, while your son-in-law jokes about how little you're worth? I want you to sit with that for a second. 22 years. Not one sick day I didn't make up. Not one shipment I lost. And I sat there in a rented shirt and laughed at my own diminishment, because that's what you do when you're trying to keep the peace in a family. If you've ever had somebody make a joke like that, about you smiling the whole time. So you can't even get angry without looking like the difficult one, I want you to comment below and tell me. Because I think a lot of you know exactly what that feels like, and I think it's important we say it out loud instead of just swallowing it, the way I did that night. It kept going through that year. Marcus started sitting in on route planning meetings I used to run solo, just to understand the operation better, he said, and slowly my name came off things. Memos went out under his signature that used to go out under mine. I remember one meeting in particular, summer of last year, where I'd built out a new routing schedule that would save the company almost $9,000 a month in fuel by adjusting our Lubbock corridor runs around the road construction on I-27. I'd been tracking that construction schedule for months, talking to drivers, mapping alternate routes by hand on a paper map I kept folded in my truck door. I presented it to the ops team on a Tuesday morning. Marcus sat there nodding along, asking good questions, taking notes. 2 weeks later, at the company's quarterly meeting with Earl's brother and the banker sitting in, Marcus stood up and presented his new routing initiative for the Lubbock corridor. Word for word my numbers, word for word my map. He never once said my name. I sat in the back of that meeting and said nothing. Afterward, in the hallway, I asked him about it. Quiet. Just the two of us. He put his hand on my shoulder, the way you'd reassure a nervous new hire, and said, "Roy, come on, it's a team effort. I'm the one who has to sell it to the board." That's just how presentation works at this level. At this level. Like I'd never once stood in a room and made a case for anything in my life. Then came the driver appreciation banquet that October, out at the convention center on Coulter Street, a night Earl had started years back to thank the men and women who kept the trucks moving, the ones who missed their kids' birthdays sitting in a cab somewhere outside of Wichita Falls. I'd organized that banquet, quietly, every single year since 2011, booked the hall, picked the caterer, wrote the little award certificates myself for safe driving milestones. That year, Marcus stood up at the podium, thanked the leadership team for pulling together such a wonderful event, and handed out the awards himself, certificates I had printed with my own hands 2 nights before, without once mentioning who'd built the thing he was standing in front of. I looked around that room for anybody who might say something, and nobody did, because nobody but Earl even knew whose idea the banquet had been in the first place, and Earl was 3 states away by then, retired, out of the loop. It wasn't just at work, either. Sunday dinners, which Denise and I had kept up every week since Carol passed, started getting rescheduled, always some reason on Marcus's end. A work dinner, a client thing, a headache. When they did happen, Marcus would steer the conversation toward his own week, his own wins. And if I brought up something from the floor, a driver's kid getting into college, A load that made it through a hailstorm without a scratch. He'd get this look, polite and glazed over, like I was an old radio playing a station nobody tuned into anymore. Denise noticed it too, I think in her own way. She started calling me more from her car, on the drive home from work. Like she needed a version of our relationship Marcus wasn't standing in the middle of. I don't think Marcus set out, on purpose, to put distance between me and my own daughter. I think it's just what happens when a man decides you're small. He stops making room for you, and the people around him learn, without ever being told, to stop making room for you either. Then, this January, Earl finally retired for real, moved down to be near his grandkids in San Antonio, handed full operational control to Marcus as the incoming general manager, with the board's blessing. The board, by the way, was 3 people, Earl's brother, a local banker, and a seat that had been sitting quiet and unclaimed for 15 years, held by an entity called Panhandle Holdings, LLC. Nobody on that board had ever bothered to ask who ran Panhandle Holdings. Earl knew. Earl had known the whole time. He just never said. Before that folder ever hit the desk, there was an all-hands meeting, the first Monday of the month, where Marcus stood up in the break room with a stack of handouts and announced a restructuring initiative to modernize Panhandle's leadership pipeline. Corporate language, the kind that doesn't mean anything until it's aimed at you specifically. He talked about right-sizing overhead and bringing in fresh energy at the senior level. I sat in the 3rd row, next to a driver 26 years old, who leaned over and whispered, "Roy, they ain't talking about you, are they?" I told him I didn't know. I did know. I'd known for weeks, the way you know weather's coming before the sky ever changes, color something, in how Marcus had stopped making eye contact with me in the hallway. Something in how he'd started copying Denise on emails that used to just come to me. 3 weeks ago, Marcus called me into his office, Earl's old office, though Marcus had already had the furniture replaced. He had a manila folder on the desk. He slid it toward me with that same salesman's smile he used the night he asked for my blessing. "Roy," he said, "I want you to know this comes from a place of respect. Respect, but with the restructuring, we're moving to offer early retirement packages to some of our longer-tenured staff. It's a good deal better than what you'd get waiting the extra 18 months to your 30-year mark. Lump sum, reduced, but immediate. I really think this is the smart move for you. 18 months. 18 months from a full pension, from the number Carol and I had planned around for over a decade, the number that was supposed to let me keep the house, keep the truck paid off, maybe even help Denise and Marcus with a down payment on that lake house they kept talking about. He wanted to cut it. Cut it right out from under me, 3 weeks before my own daughter's husband was going to stand at the head of a table and call it the smart move. I asked him if this was his idea or the board's. He said, "Does it matter?" "I run this company now, Roy." I said I'd think about it. He said, "Don't think too long. The offer's only good this week." Then he smiled, the same smile from the kitchen table 7 years earlier, and said, "Come on, Roy, we're family. I'm looking out for you." I drove home that night and sat in my truck in the driveway for 40 minutes before I went inside. I thought about Carol. I thought about the $40,000 I never told her the ending of. I thought about 11% and how it had grown, quietly, into something Marcus Vance had never once thought to ask about. Because men like Marcus don't imagine a dispatcher could be anything more than what he sees on the org chart. That night, I didn't call a lawyer right away. First, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table Marcus sat at 7 years earlier, asking for my blessing, and I opened the fireproof lockbox for the first time in longer than I want to admit. 16 years of purchase agreements, folded and refolded, some of them yellowed at the edges. I hadn't added it all up in my head in years. I just kept buying, a little at a time, whenever Earl called, and whenever there was money to spare after Denise's college, after Carol's treatments, after the roof needed replacing in 2017. Around 11 that night, I called Harlan. Metz. Harlan's the attorney who'd handled Panhandle Holdings since 2009, the same one who drew up every one of those little quiet purchases over 16 years, back when his office was still above the feed store on 6th Street. He picked up on the second ring, sounding half asleep. "Roy Callahan," he said. "It's been a while. Everything all right?" "Harlan," I said, "I need you to run a number for me. What percentage do I actually own now of Panhandle?" There was a long pause on the line, the kind where you can hear a man sitting up straighter in his chair. "You want the honest number, or you want me to check the paperwork first?" "Check it. I'll wait." I heard him rustling through a filing cabinet, muttering dates under his breath: 2009, 2012, 2015, 2019, 2021, and then he came back on the line, and he laughed, the way a man laughs when he's been waiting a long time for the chance to say something out loud. "Roy," he said, "you crossed 51% 4 years ago. Spring of 2021, to be exact, right after that last purchase during the fuel price spike. You're the majority shareholder of Panhandle Freight Company. Have been since before Marcus Vance's name was ever on a paycheck there, if you count from when he actually started drawing a salary versus when the deal closed. 51%. I sat there in my kitchen, in the same chair Carol used to sit in, and I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. 16 years of quiet paper, and it had never once occurred to me that it might someday be the thing that saved me. 51%. I owned that company. I had owned it, in the eyes of the law, since before my own son-in-law walked in the door with his sharp suit and his sales numbers. I didn't march in the next morning and announce it. That's not how I do things, and if you've watched any of my stories before, you know that's not how this ends either. I let Marcus think he had the week. I let him think the folder was already as good as signed. Here's the detail I want you to remember, because it comes back around. Buried in that early retirement folder Marcus handed me, on page 4, was a line requiring board approval for any change in senior operational staffing standard boilerplate, the kind of clause nobody reads. Board approval. And board approval, under the bylaws Earl's own lawyer wrote 15 years earlier, required sign-off from any shareholder holding more than 50%. Marcus had built his own trap and mailed me the key. Friday morning, I put on a shirt I hadn't worn since Earl's retirement dinner and drove to the office early, before the floor filled up. I brought Harlan Metz with me, and I brought the original stock ledger 16 years of quiet paper, going back to a $40,000 check written in the worst month of the recession. Marcus was surprised to see me in his office that early. "Roy," he said, still smiling, "you didn't have to dress up to sign some paperwork." I set the folder back down on his desk, his early retirement offer, and slid a second folder next to it. "Before I sign anything," I said, I need you to sign this." He opened it. It was the board resolution he'd need to finalize the restructuring, the one requiring shareholder sign-off. His eyes moved down to the signature line, and I watched the exact moment his face changed, because right above where he was meant to sign, in print, it read, "Approved by majority shareholder, Panhandle Holdings, LLC Roy Callahan, managing member." "You're joking," he said. "I'm not a joking man, Marcus," I said. "I never have been. You just never thought to ask." Harlan laid out the ledger on the desk, page by page, 16 years of purchases, dates and dollar amounts running back to a $40,000 check written in the worst month of the recession. Marcus picked up the first page with a hand that wasn't quite steady, and I watched him do the math in his head. Watched the color move out of his face the way it does when a man realizes the ground he's standing on isn't the ground he thought it was. This isn't he started, then stopped. Tried again. Earl never said anything about this. Ever. In 3 years. Earl kept a lot of things quiet, I said. Man ran a business for 50 years. He understood the value of that. Marcus looked at the bylaw page, the one Harlan had flagged, the one written into the original charter before Marcus had ever set foot in Amarillo, the clause giving the majority shareholder final authority over any staffing decision affecting operations leadership. Including, Harlan pointed out, calm as anything, the general manager position Marcus currently sat in. "So what?" Marcus said, quieter now, the smile fully gone. "You're firing me? In front of my father-in-law's lawyer, 3 weeks before you were supposed to retire?" "I never said I was firing you," I said. "I said you don't get to decide my pension is negotiable." There's a difference, Marcus, and it's the same difference between running a company and just standing at the front of one. I want to pause here and say, and I mean this, hit that subscribe button if you haven't yet, because stories like this one, where the quiet man was holding the whole hand the entire time, are exactly what this channel is built on, and I've got a lot more of them coming. Marcus tried to recover. Salesmen always do. "Roy, we can figure something out. This doesn't have to change anything with the family." "It already changed something with the family," I said. "The day you stood up at my daughter's birthday and made a joke about what a dispatcher's worth. I let that one go. I'm not letting this one go. I didn't fire him. I want to be clear about that, because I know some of you are hoping I marched him out in handcuffs, and that's not who I am, and it's not who Carol raised me to be either. What I did was call a board meeting that afternoon. Earl's brother, the banker, and myself, representing Panhandle Holdings. I voted to keep Marcus on as director of sales, the job he was actually good at, the job he'd earned honestly, before ambition got in front of good sense. I brought in an outside operations manager, a woman named Priscilla Ruiz, who'd run logistics for a bigger outfit down in Fort Worth, to take over as general manager. And I restored my own pension, in full, backdated, with an apology on record from the board for how the early retirement conversation had been handled. Earl called me that same afternoon from San Antonio. Must have heard from his brother within the hour. "Roy Callahan," he said, so hard he had to catch his breath. 16 years I kept my mouth shut, wondering if you'd ever notice what you were sitting on. I always figured you'd work it out eventually. Didn't figure it'd take a fool trying to steal your pension to do it. I asked him why he never told me himself, all those years. "Because it wasn't mine to tell," he said. "That's your money, Roy. Man's got a right to know what he owns in his own time, not mine." Out on the dispatch floor the next morning, Word had already gotten around small company, and secrets don't keep long around a coffee pot. A driver named Dale Whitcomb, been with us almost as long as me, came up and shook my hand without saying a word. Just held it a second longer than a regular handshake usually goes. Priscilla Ruiz, the new general manager I'd brought on, told me later that morning shift showed up 10 minutes early that whole first week, like people wanted to be there for whatever came next. Denise found out that same evening. Marcus told her himself, sitting at their kitchen table. The same table where he'd once asked me for my blessing. She called me not for him, she told me later, but for me, because in 32 years she'd never once known her own father owned a piece of anything, let alone the company that had just tried to push him out the door for the crime of turning 61. "Dad," she said on the phone, "why didn't you ever tell me?" 32 years, Dad. 32 years, and I thought I knew everything about you. Because I didn't want you marrying a man for what your father might be worth someday, I told her. I wanted you marrying him for who he was on his own. Turns out that told us plenty, one way or the other. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she asked me the question I'd been dreading since Harlan first said 51% out loud. "Did you know, this whole time, sitting at our dinners, listening to him make those little jokes about you, did you know you could have shut him up any time you wanted?" "I did," I said. "But a man doesn't flash a card like that just to win an argument at a birthday party. Denise, I was saving it for something that mattered. Your pension doesn't matter to him. Mine did to me. We had dinner at my place about 2 weeks after, just the three of us, first time back at my kitchen table since it all came out. Marcus showed up in jeans instead of a sport coat, which I noticed, because in 7 years I don't believe I'd ever seen the man out of business casual in my own house. He didn't try to charm anybody that night, didn't make a single joke. Somewhere around dessert, he set his fork down and said, like it cost him something to say it, "Roy, I spent 3 years thinking I was the smartest person in every room I walked into at that company. Turns out I was just the loudest. I didn't say anything clever back. I just nodded and passed him the pie." Marcus and Denise are still married. I'll be honest with you, it's been a hard few months at family dinners. But something shifted in him, the salesman's polish has cracked a little, and underneath it, I think there's a man who got humbled in a way he needed. He apologized to me, for real, no audience, no smile, about 6 weeks after it all came out. Said he'd spent his whole career trying to look like the smartest man in every room, and it took getting outplayed by his father-in-law to understand that being smart and being decent aren't always the same skill. I still go into that office most mornings. Not because I have to anymore, because I want to. I still know every driver's name. I still know the smell of diesel like the smell of my own kitchen. My desk is back by the window, not because I asked for it, but because Priscilla moved it back the week she took over, said a man who owns half the company ought to at least get his view. Denise and I still have Sunday dinner, most weeks, and this time it doesn't get rescheduled. Marcus comes now too, and he's quieter at that table than he used to be, not smaller, exactly, just more honest. I think that's the best any of us can hope to get out of somebody who's been humbled the right way instead of the wrong one. And every so often, when a new hire asks who that quiet older fellow near the window is, somebody on the floor tells them, "That's Roy. Owns half the place. Never once acted like it." If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the quiet one in the room that everybody underestimated, do me a favor and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and stick around, because I've got more stories like this one coming every week. Being underestimated isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the part right before the folder gets signed,